Hello, students. Today we're going to look at our second installment, or 1C.2, about the Progressive Era, and we're going to study women in public life. So our unit question is, how did the Progressive Era attempt to address the ills of American society stemming from industrial capitalism, urbanization, and political corruption? And today we're going to look at how, as a result of social and economic change, many women entered public life as workers and reformers. So for the context, in the last module, 1C1, you read about the progressive movement, or you learned about the progressive movement and how progressive reformers work to address issues of industrialization and urbanization. And in this module, we're going to extend our knowledge and look at the work women did during the progressive movement. You're going to complete the guided reading notes. You can see it's module 1C2. This should be in your folder. And what you'll do first is you will take a look at the terminology and complete the terminology. So hit pause and complete the terminology. So women in the workforce. So what types of jobs would women in each group do? So during the industrial era, women of middle and upper class could afford to stay home and raise families. And prior to the Civil War, this is what women did. Poor women did not have that choice. So we're going to explore the work that women did during this era. So you have a chart on your guided reading. It says, what types of jobs would women in each group hold? So what you're going to do is you're going to list the bolded occupations underneath each subtopic. So first, we're going to start with lower class. Lower class women tended to work in agriculture or in farms. They tended to do domestic work like housekeeping or childcare and some manufacturing jobs. Upper and middle class women worked white collar jobs. These jobs tended to need like a high school diploma. So a stenographer who would take notes, bookkeepers, typists, or telephone operators. African American women tended to work in agriculture or domestic work again, like as a housekeeper with childcare. And immigrants tend to work with agriculture, domestic work again, piecework, which some of that could be brought home, or taking in boarders, so opening up their home and charging rent for people to come and live with them. On your guide, it said, how did educational opportunities for upper and middle class women change? And that's what we're going to focus on now. So new women's colleges were established. This is in bold, so you should write it down. So women's colleges sought to grant women an excellent education. Examples of very famous early women's colleges, Vassar College, which had a faculty of 8 men and 22 women, accepted its first students in 1865. And then Smith and Wellesley colleges followed in 1875. Schools like Columbia, Brown, Harvard refused to admit women, but they established a separate college for women. So like, for example, Harvard, for women, you had Radcliffe. That was like the sister school where you would get the Harvard education, but you would get the degree from Radcliffe. So when you take a look at your guide after you finish what new colleges did for women, it says, how did these new opportunities affect the lives of upper and middle class women? Well, marriage was no longer a woman's only option. So basically, women had more to do than just get married. So you want to write that down. It offered an opportunity to pursue a profession in the workforce. So it wasn't that you were just going to get married and have babies. You could actually have a profession. And then women began to apply their skills that they learned in their colleges or their higher education to the needed social reforms. So this all helped women become more active in the progressive movement. So women begin to lead reform, particularly with the suffrage movement. So previously, since women could not run or vote or run for public office, they sought to improve life outside of the government, which is why they pursued things like the temperance movement or child labor. They would try to influence other voters, male voters, to do this. But women wanted to improve their political strength by winning the right to vote. So on your guide, it says, what was the significance of each of the following? And what we're first going to take a look at is the NAWSA, which is the second column in this and on your guide. So educated women, adding them to women's movements strengthened the movement because they were educated, because they had college degrees. So the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or the NAWSA, was founded by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and they coordinated the national suffrage movement. So this is what you would like to write on your guide. In the first column, it's the NACW, which was led by Josephine Ruffin, and it identified the mission that African American Women's Club would support the moral education of the race for which we are identified. So what they did was they managed nurseries, reading rooms, kindergartens, and this helped to create a social space for Black women. If Black women were in the home and taking care of their children, they're not able to get out and be politically active to educate themselves. So this association helped Black women become more politically active by taking care of some of those day-to-day necessities so that women of color could participate in the political arena. Just on a side note here, before we start to talk about what reforms women wanted, it was very important for women to obtain the right to vote. But this was a dangerous thing for many men, for businesses, and particularly male-run businesses, obviously, because if women got the right to vote, and as you remember from the last module, we discussed the temperance movement, or trying to abolish the sale of liquor, because of that idea that you can change people by changing their morals, and drinking was seen as being immoral. So if women gain the right to vote, they might vote against or vote for the prohibition of alcohol. And that meant that people who owned saloons were going to be out of money. Another thing that was a concern was the textile industry, which used child labor. They were worried if women were granted the right to vote, then they might vote to abolish child labor. And then they're going to have to spend more money on workers. They're not going to have a ready supply of small workers to fit the niche of what they needed the children to do. So women being granted the right to vote was very scary for big businesses. So there were a few things that women wanted to reform. One was to try and convince state legislatures to grant women the right to vote. So this actually did help in some ways, particularly out west in Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado, and Idaho. They granted women the right to vote at the state level, but other states, those efforts failed. A second strategy was to try to pursue court cases to test the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment, which was adopted in 1868, makes it that all persons born or naturalized in the United States, including former slaves, are citizens of the country, and this guarantees them equal protection under the law. However, the result of this was they ruled that women were citizens, but that citizenship didn't automatically grant the right to vote. Because if you look in the 14th Amendment, it says guarantees equal protection, but it doesn't say that it necessarily grants everyone the right to vote. So they were splitting hairs here. A third strategy was to campaign for national constitutional amendments to grant women the right to vote. This was always voted down. We're not going to see the 19th Amendment, until we get to our last section of this unit, which is when it does pass in 1920, the 19th Amendment, which allows women the right to vote. So now that you're finished with taking the notes, what you're going to do is you're going to work on a project, and our project is our resumes. And this will be uploaded onto Schoology shortly. Hopefully I will have it around the time that you're able to take care of this assignment of 1C.1, Women in Public Life. Have a good day.